All right. Hey there. It's Dr. Elisa Song, holistic pediatrician and pediatric functional medicine expert. And we are here today in honor of PANDAS and PANS Awareness Day. I have an awesome panel of parents here. I have four awesome mamas and one awesome papa, right? So I'm going to just check here, make sure this is going. We are live now. Excellent. So before we begin, I want to just make sure that everyone knows that we are here to really educate you guys and share our journeys, right, as parents, my journey as a practitioner, and hopefully raise awareness about what PANS and PANDAS is, because there are a lot of misconceptions out there. Okay, so before we begin, let us know who you are, where you're from. Hey, Michelle. Hey, Whitney. Hey, Farah. If you guys have any questions about PANS or PANDAS, let us know. And we're going to answer a ton of questions hopefully as we go along. Be sure to share this. What I'm going to do right now, I'm going to share this with my group, my Thriving Child community group, because I know that they were interested in watching this. So share the link with any parents, practitioners. So important to have more practitioners on board. Any friends, who are struggling with this issue or thinking that their child might have PANS or PANDAS. And let's get started. Okay, so before we begin, I'm going to actually do a quick little presentation. Actually, this is not letting me share here. Okay. All right. We'll have to do that in a little bit. So I want to start with a little presentation on what PANDAS and PANS is, right? Because I think that will really help to set the stage for what we're about to discuss, okay? Because as I mentioned, there are a lot of misconceptions about what PANS and PANDAS are. So quick little slideshow, and then we're gonna get into our discussion. All right, here we go. Okay, if you guys can see this, I'm going to have this on my computer, on my iPhone too, but give me a thumbs up if you guys can see this, because I want to make sure that all the slides are on. Okay, so we are here for, as I mentioned, for PANDAS Awareness Day, which is October 9. Do you guys know which one this is? What number PANDAS Awareness Day this is?
I was just looking at the PANDAS Network site.
I feel like it might be the third one, right?
At least.
So this is, and it's every day, every year on October 9, hopefully from now on, right? So as many of you guys know, and we know here in the Bay Area, right, we're in the San Francisco Bay Area, we are really facing this epidemic of childhood neurodevelopmental and neuropsychiatric illnesses. And in the United States, it's estimated that at least 1 in 200 kids has PANS or PANDAS. Probably more, because as we'll see, it's often misdiagnosed and definitely underdiagnosed. And as many as 1 in 4 kids with OCD, so these are kids not diagnosed with PANS or PANDAS yet, but with something like Tourette syndrome, other tic disorders, they probably or may have PANDAS or PANS. I did do a 2-part podcast last year, really long, like an hour and a half each, on PANS and PANDAS, and I have a link here for you guys. So these slides are going to be up for the replay. The PANDAS Network also has some great information. We're going to have a list of resources. We've kind of been working together to have a list of resources for you guys, for your kids, for parents, right, for hopefully for educators. And I'll get that to you guys as soon as we're done compiling that list. So as I mentioned, PANS and PANDAS is often misdiagnosed. It's very likely underdiagnosed. In fact, I know it's underdiagnosed, and it's too often not believed, right? So that's something that's so challenging for parents and practitioners. So how do parents learn about PANS? What you'll see on this slide is that it wasn't from their pediatrician most of the time, right? Only about 6% of parents learned about PANS or PANDAS from their pediatrician. The vast majority learn about it from other sources, maybe another practitioner who specializes in PANS or PANDAS on their own, right? A lot of parents, right? I mean, Dr. Google, right? We kind of learn a lot on Dr. Google, so, or a friend or family member, but typically it was on their own, or maybe another doctor who's familiar with PANS or PANDAS who kind of planted those seeds, but not enough through their own pediatrician, right? So pediatricians really need to be more aware. How long did it take for a diagnosis? I mean, look at this. Over a third of kids, it took over 3 years. There are some kids who got diagnosed, 30% in less than 6 months. That's really fast. And, if you're one of those, that's amazing, because, the the earlier the treatment, the less heartache, right? The less kind of sorrow for the whole family, for that child. And also, I think maybe a little bit more effective. It's never too late, right? We want the diagnosis, but we don't want to wait 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And how many doctors did most kids see before they were diagnosed with PANDAS? If you look, over 90% of kids with PANS and PANDAS saw 3 or more doctors, right? And more than half saw over 5 doctors. So that's a lot of doctors, right? So who are they seeing? They're probably seeing psychiatrists, neurologists, maybe they're pediatrician, developmental behavior pediatricians, right? But not finding the right answers. So the most common initial diagnosis to them, right, anxiety or OCD. So this is to plant some seeds if your parents are listening, that if your child was diagnosed with OCD or, oppositional defiant disorder or generalized anxiety disorder, and they weren't always like that, right? It's not like they were always, even as an infant, really kind of, tons and tons of anxiety and separation anxiety. It's something that's a little different. Just have in your mind that it could be PANS or PANDAS. So what is PANDAS and PANS? PANS stands for Pediatric Acute Onset Neuropsychiatric Syndrome, and it can be triggered by infections, and it can also have non-infectious triggers. So when it's triggered by strep, it's called PANDAS. Okay, that stands for Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorders Associated with Strep. But there can be a lot of other infections that trigger PANS. And in this group, we have a lot of other infections that are not strep. Okay, so there is some strep there, but also know that with PANS or PANDAS, you can have multiple infections, right? It's not just one. And some of the infections include Lyme or its co-infections, Epstein-Barr, mycoplasma, herpes 1 and 2, right? If your child gets lots of cold sores, think about herpes 1. And look at these really common childhood infections, right? Herpes 6, which is roseola, Coxsackie, the hand, foot, and mouth virus. I have kids who that was the main trigger. Parvovirus B19, which is slap cheek disease, and even the flu can trigger PANS. And then non-infectious triggers include molds or heavy metals. This is a little graphic just to make it a little easier, because PANS is the big subset, right? It's all PANS, right? Pediatric Acute Onset Neuropsychiatric Syndrome. And then we divide it up into infectious triggers. When it's caused by strep, it's PANDAS. And then when it's other infections, it's simply called PANS. When it's caused by non-infectious triggers, we also call it PANS. All right, this is a diagnostic criteria used by the Stanford PANS Clinic, by the NIH to diagnose PANS and to diagnose PANDAS. And you'll see that PANS is defined as an abrupt, dramatic onset of OCD or severely restricted food intake, and at least 2 of the following symptoms, right? Whether it's anxiety or mood swings or rages. A lot of times we'll see handwriting decline, right? Deterioration of fine motor skills. Urination problems, frequent urination, all of a sudden, wetting the bed. And with PANDAS, we'll also see, sometimes these significant OCDs and tics, right? But what I want to share with you, and we'll share today in the panel, is that PANS and PANDAS, it's a clinical diagnosis. There's not a single test that can say this is absolutely PANS or this is absolutely not PANS, right? It's a clinical diagnosis, and it's not always abrupt and dramatic. You can have this subacute onset, right? And sometimes when we look back in the history, right, when we look back, we'll see there were little flares, right? There were little PANS episodes that went away because they can go away, right? Or maybe there were little episodes that weren't that bad, but then they got worse and worse and worse, right? So it doesn't have to be this overnight, like a light switch.
Even some kids I've talked to who had sudden onset per the Stanford definition, when you ask them, they'll say, no, stuff was happening for weeks.
Yes.
So it seems sudden on the outside, but on the inside to them, it's not.
Yeah, hindsight.
Right. Yeah. What's fascinating too is that a lot of times parents will say, I totally remember going through a phase when I was a kid where like I couldn't step on the floor. I had to walk on tiptoes, or like I had to touch things a certain way. And I was so anxious about it. And then it went away, right? So we can see sometimes these PANS, Ron, you're nodding, right? So that we can see that there was this PANS type episode even in parents, maybe the susceptibility, right? Or we'll see in the family, like years and years ago, a history of Sydenham's chorea, right? St. Vitus's dance, where you have these like really these tic-like, they're called choreiform movements, which are these big like arm movements or tics that run in the family, right? So just know it's a clinical diagnosis. It's not always abrupt and dramatic. Right? These are some of the symptoms that are associated with PANS and PANDAS, right? And I'm sure in this room, I don't know. So for Cindy, I know Simon, a lot of it's handwriting, but what are some of the common symptoms that you've seen?
So he started with, well, now I know it's frequent urination was probably one of the first symptoms we had. But when we really figured it out is he started having extreme anxiety. He started having temper tantrums at school. He started stealing from the neighbors. His behavior was completely out of control. And I remember we came here because we'd seen you for the frequent, well, not for the frequent urination, but for constipation, which again was sign of anxiety. And we were in the middle of a meeting and he ran out towards El Camino. And you said, that's not the same kid.
He was a totally different kid, right? And then, I mean, Cindy and I would just look back last week at our notes and we look back at, Cindy had called about anxiety a couple of years before, right? So,
well, we think the constipation was
yeah. So, and then what were the main symptoms for Ava?
For Ava, it was complex because she had already gotten treatment for Lyme, and a lot of the symptoms.
And this was just, I'm sorry to interrupt, but this was classic Lyme, right? She was in New Jersey. She got the bullseye rash, the joint swelling, right? There was no question about it, right? Like the ER doc said, this is Lyme, and put her on treatment right away, right? It wasn't a controversial diagnosis. Right?
But the moment I took her off those antibiotics, I didn't know who she had turned. And she was so young at that point. Yeah. She was a week before starting kindergarten. She had just turned 5, maybe 8 weeks before that. And she was having night terrors and where she was screaming that somebody was after her, but she wouldn't be looking at me, and her eyes looked black. And she wouldn't step on the hardwood floors anymore because there were cracks. She wouldn't eat because the food was dirty. She was urinating on the floor, but she wouldn't acknowledge that she would just walk away from it and not even think that it was her urine. She was just a different child, and she was super aggressive, just really irritable, and lots of long tantrums. I didn't have the ability for handwriting and stuff like that because she was so young, but that really has been the persisting thing that has been so slow to come back, is her grip strength and the fine motor and writing and making sure that everything is the right direction. But it's been 3 years.
And one thing I remember when Ava was going through that, right, because at 4.5, 5, I mean, it's gonna be so subtle, right? But when I was talking with her and engaging with her, right, when you're chatting with toddlers, there was a slowness to her response. It was like she wasn't quite getting my questions like she would have. Like just that interchange was not as fast, right? So there was something like blocking her comprehension that was, But if you're not attuned to that, you wouldn't necessarily catch it. You might just say, oh, she's tired or it's an off day, right?
Yeah, right.
So, how about you guys?
So for us, it actually was very sudden onset this summer about 3 years ago when our son started having tics. So he was doing these strange sort of huffing sounds, and when we would go out for a walk, he would spit on the ground. What's interesting is I took him to our original pediatrician, which would be maybe more mainstream or conventional, and they told us to just ignore it and that it would go away. And something in me was like, this isn't quite right, and doesn't feel, and he had been sort of sick over the summer, and so Ron had been sick, so something seemed off. We knew he had some sensory processing issues maybe a couple years prior, but we'd been dealing with those through occupational therapy, thinking they would sort of resolve and he would grow out of them. But this kind of tics, and then the frequent urination was the other one. So waking up all of a sudden, he'd been potty trained since he was 2, and now at 7, he was getting up 4 or 5 times a night to pee. So those were the big ones. I think there's a lot of the other ones on the list. I mean, there's definitely was rage and tantrums, but it was hard for us to distinguish what was kind of age appropriate. It's hard to always know. And so when they're younger, you don't always know how they should be handling.
Yeah. I mean, the other misconception or the criteria that doesn't always fit is, for PANS or PANDAS, typically like at the Stanford clinic, they really want to see a neurotypical baseline, right? A kid without any sensory issues, behavioral issues, significant concerns. And so we went off. We're gonna fix that in just a little bit. We're gonna get Peter on.
Are we on just audio?
With audio's on.
Okay,
yeah.
You can still hear us then.
Yeah. So, and you can see the slides, but sure. One of the things that we see is that kids, I mean, first of all, I have to be totally honest, I mean, there are very few kids who are completely neurotypical, right? I mean, really. I mean, we all have, all of us at times, like sensory issues and things that bother us, right? Sorry, our video is off for a little bit, but
our technician's fixing it.
So yes, so with Alex, what I remember is that
It's going to sleep.
okay. So with Alex, I remember one of the things that Amy had said after we started treatment, and this was after, remember, his OT,
Yes.
right, had said there's something not quite right.
Yeah.
Right. There's something more than just sensory processing issues.
I remember
right?
we were setting up a sensory gym in our home, right? Sort of this initial symptom, and Lee actually has a son the same age and had seen some of the sensory issues, and so we had lovely OT, worked great, came over to our home and helped us set it up. And I remember talking to her and saying, you know, I think this is all helping. It would sort of resolve small things here and there, but it never actually, it didn't seem like it was helping in the bigger picture, right? We could deal with certain needs that he would, you know, get his wiggles out and so on. But said, do you think, you know, it feels like there's something more? And she said, there's got to be something else, because this is, you know, they're not resolving. And so we started treating those, frankly, not as PANS or PANDAS at the time. We were just treating them through supplements, you know, probiotics, looking at B vitamins, omegas, some of the general kind of wellness stuff that Dr. Song recommends. And then the tics came a couple years later.
Well, and then one of the things too that took a little while, right, was that we had a really hard time getting any blood work.
Yeah,
right.
Young.
They were young, and so we really needed that lab data, right, to pursue and justify the further treatment for PANS.
Yeah.
Right? But then I remember when we started that, I don't remember what we started, but I remember you came in, and I mean, I was trying to not, you know, cry.
There's tears
because you said that for the first time since you can remember, that he let you hug him.
Yes.
Right? That it wasn't like he just it wasn't too much. Right?
Yeah, for sure. One of the hugs and kisses, right? So he would always have to wipe away the kiss because the sensory.
Yeah.
Well, and then I think in addition with some of the sensory too was there was like certain clothes, right? I mean, this kid was living in like the exact same clothes for weeks on end. And then I would say some anxiety on top of that too, right? Not in addition to the bedwetting at night, but he wanted somebody in his room all the time. It wasn't night terrors, right? But it was just, he couldn't be away from one of us, right?
Yeah.
He always wanted a parent there with him.
But not to fast forward too much, but he does let me kiss and cuddle him.
Yeah,
now,
so he's so sweet
wonderful.
now.
That is
So
wonderful.
sweet, right?
That's a
Yeah.
good fast forward.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
What about
So my Alex, it really started with the food aversion and the raging. And that's where we saw it at first. I think the tics, he had a vocal tic, which came shortly after, but it sounds like he's clearing his throat. And it was November that it happened, and it very easily and he has allergies, and it was really hard for us to understand. And then the OCD came shortly after, but the OCD kind of focused on a lot of intrusive thoughts, and they don't necessarily share that with you. And so it was hard for us to tease out what was OCD, but it was really the raging and the refusing to eat that kind of stood out the most for us in the beginning.
Yeah.
And this is a kid who is sweet and gentle and empathetic and kind, and he turned into someone that we just didn't recognize. And ours was not sudden onset either. It was more of a progressive, and he had been diagnosed with sensory processing disorder and several ADD and a couple of other things. So how long it was actually there, we still question that.
Yeah. And he still gets the food restriction at times, right? And that is a common feature that we'll see kids who just, it's not just a sensory of looking and gagging, but like they just really don't want to eat. But they might be afraid to throw up, or it might be some of the sensory issues. And one of the other things I'll see is something called misophonia or dysphonia, where there's certain sounds that they just can't stand, right?
Yes.
And I've had kids where it's, and oftentimes it's not every sound, it's like one or two particular sounds, like the sound of their mother chewing, right? So I've had moms that have had to eat in like a totally different room. I couldn't even pretend, it was like, looked like they were swallowing, right? And so, I mean, it can affect so many different parts of the brain, right? So that's why there's so many varied symptoms.
And I think one thing for me with anxiety as a diagnosis, so Simon's anxiety, when we got the diagnosis of anxiety, I was like blown away, because this is the kid who like see a mom like when he went to kindergarten, anything, and his anxiety was expressed as anger. So he'd get really mad at me in the morning, or he'd fight me about going to school, and I thought he was just being kind of stubborn, and but then that was expressed later, that's his anxiety, and so he's like frustrated, he's scared, but it comes out as anger. And same thing with his OCD. It's not typical OCD. It's not lining things up or cleaning all the time. It's patterns. So how he goes to school, he has to have his iPad. He has to know who's picking him up. If it changes for any reason, you know, if the kids are dropped off in a different order, was beside himself. And I didn't know that was OCD, right? But and compulsion also, like he was stealing things, which is
well, and it's hard because, you know, with a lot of kids, especially when they're young, or, you know, we might think, well, there's a reason for this, right? You know, they start a new school, or, you know, a family member passed away, or, you know, a sibling was born, right? There's something, you're like, okay, maybe that's why they're anxious, maybe that's why they're so clingy. You know, they have stomach flu and now they don't want to eat. And there's always, I hear a lot of excuses, not excuses, but justification in the beginning, right? Like there's a reason why. And I think that's also why we as parents, when it's not on our radar and we're not aware that this could be PANS, and when your doctor isn't aware, I think that's where the diagnosis can get stalled too. Right.
Well, and I think what's interesting about this is the symptoms can ebb and flow, and so they'll be stronger at different times. And if you don't know that, then you'll think that whatever the symptom was has gone away, and so the problem's no longer there, they're better. But it will come back based upon flares or triggers or stress.
Right? Stress can trigger flares too. One thing with the dilated pupils, right? Sometimes you'll just look, and if you notice that your kids' pupils are like filling up their whole eye, right? I mean, and why is that? That's because they're in this sympathetic system overdrive, right? They're in that constant fight or flight state when they're flaring. So their eyes are wide open, right? They're ready to, fight or flee, essentially, right? A lot of times they'll fight and have rages and tantrums, right? But that can be another sign. Sometimes like they'll call it piano hands, where there's just a tremor, and if you have them hold out their hands, they might be not able to hold their hands still, right? So there can be some physical signs too. Okay, so PANS, essentially, what is it from? Why does it happen? We don't totally know the pathophysiology. We know that there's some arm of the Th17 immune system that's imbalanced. Stanford's doing great research. I mean, that's where we're going to get some more answers, right? But what we do know is that PANS is an autoimmune encephalitis. So what does that mean? Encephalitis, any itis, means inflammation, right? And so it means that there's inflammation in the brain, because basically your child's immune system is attacking itself, right? It's a brain on fire. So there's autoimmune antibodies that we can measure, many kids, that show that they're creating these neuropsychiatric symptoms due to that inflammation, right? So we really want to think about, getting this awareness out in whatever way we can, because early and accurate diagnosis and appropriate treatment is going to be key to recovery, right? I've had parents, email or message and say, well, my kid is 18 or they're 21, and this sounds so much like my kid. Is it too late? And it's not too late, but we really want to start as early as possible so that the immune system has a better chance. I mean, autoimmune sounds scary, right? Because many of us maybe know people with autoimmune illness that's, and they're really sick, right? Whether it's with multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, right? But autoimmune disease is entirely reversible and treatable, especially if we can get to it early, right? So it's not kind of a sentence that's forever, right? So, but we just need to know what's going on. So some of the treatment principles, we'll just run through quickly. And there's so many different treatments that are possible, but it really has to be individualized, right? I mean, as we share our treatment stories, I mean, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. And the treatment really needs to be, we need to follow that child's story and their journey, right? Because the journey is going to vary for each child, and we need to be able to be flexible with the plan, right? Like when we meet, it's very rare that we say, oh, let's keep the plan the same, right? I mean, there's often little tweaks depending on what's going on, right? Now, Ava's had a great, she's doing so well. Right?
That's it.
I mean,
Yeah.
But in the beginning, right? In the beginning, it might be that we need to change up the treatment plan every 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, right? And it's not just, oh, I'll see you in 6 months or a year and we'll see what's going on, right? Because it can change quickly.
And parents that are in the midst of this, it's important to hear that the treatments can be so different. And I find myself feeling guilty or feeling like I'm not being aggressive enough because I hear other people doing so much more, and they said, well, why hasn't she gotten IVI? I mean, they did that at the conference. They're like, well, why does she still have her tonsils? Why she haven't gotten IVIG yet? And I'm like, those are aces in our pockets.
Yeah.
We're going to pull them out any second. But like, don't poke a sleeping bear. She has like gotten,
and we were about to that card, the IVIG card, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so, but again, it's definitely not a one size fits all approach. Right. And so, and also, as we were talking about in the beginning, with what we really need is an integrative approach, right? To really look at that child as not just a kid with infections that need to be killed, right? Or not just an immune system that needs to be blasted. I mean, we need to look at that whole child and really support their brain and their gut and their mitochondria and their hormones, and really look at the whole picture. Right. And so that's where, taking what's called a functional medicine approach and an integrative approach is really important. And unfortunately, the last thing I wrote, that it's not just one and done. Right. Unfortunately, as we all know, flares are often more the norm, especially in the beginning. So we need to know how to jump on those flares, get the inflammation down. Right. So it really is a journey. And, hopefully you guys, I know I have some questions on how to find good practitioners. We'll talk about that. But it's, really takes a team effort. Right. And finding that team that can support you and your child. So the first treatment arm is really figuring out the triggers, identifying the triggers, typically with blood testing, and then treating them. Right. Whether you use pharmaceutical, antibiotics or antivirals or antiparasitics or herbals. There's pros and cons to both, and we've used both, right? For all the kids here, and also know that there can be, as I said, multiple infections to deal with. So it might not just be doing the strep. You might be dealing with strep and Lyme, or Bartonella and Mycoplasma, right? The second step, which is really important, is protecting the brain and reducing inflammation, right? And in the beginning, it's going to be using your NSAIDs, right? Like ibuprofen. Right. Now, ibuprofen is really interesting because sometimes when I'm not sure, is this PANS? Is this not PANS? I'll use ibuprofen as a test, right? As a diagnostic test even, right? Where you give ibuprofen 3 times a day, 10 milligrams per kilogram, and do that for maybe a week. And parents say, oh my gosh, they're a different kid on the ibuprofen. They're calm, they feel better, their head doesn't hurt anymore, they can sleep through the night. Then that really raises my suspicion. Okay, we got to look into PANS, right? And then steroids, right? So depending on what's going on, sometimes we'll do a quick little steroid burst, like we would with the patient with asthma. We were talking about that, right? And just because that's just blasting the immune system, right? It's suppressing, right? It's not healing, but it's suppressing. Sometimes we'll do a longer steroid taper over like a month or 2 if that's needed. But then we really want to know what are more natural supportive ways to reduce inflammation, like fish oils and curcumin, antioxidants like glutathione or vitamin C. I mean, there's a whole host of things, right? And anti-inflammatory diet, right? It doesn't help to just put down the fire if we're going to keep fueling the fire with, unfortunately, crappy food, right? Or lots of things that are really inflaming to the body and, and getting them exposed to lots of toxins. And this is where, going gluten-free and dairy-free can be really helpful to some, not all, but to most kids, at least trying it. I'd say it's absolutely worth a try, for kids. And then artificial dyes and preservatives. And this is where Amy and Ron, right? I mean, that was one of the first things that actually, I think you guys figured that out on your own.
Yeah, we went there right away initially for the sensory, actually, before we knew it was PANS. We went there on the dyes, having read and researched and heard that could help. And we definitely saw, some initial kind of calming behaviors. And then through some of the testing we did on food sensitivities, we went dairy-free for our son, and then the whole family, we went gluten-free when we figured out that our daughter also had PANS. And so we're now a gluten-free, dairy-free everything, not calorie free, but everything. Family, and it's not an easy journey.
No.
It's definitely one of the harder ones, and I think as your children get older, it's hard for me to advise other families on that when they're teenagers, because it's, you know, that's a hard time. When they're younger, I would say, you know, they don't have other ways to get food, so they kind of, you know, you can control it a little bit more as a parent. But I would say, is, you know, with these other, combined with some of these other anti-inflammatories, it's a great strategy.
Yeah, and I think what you guys are doing, and really, you know, as we move, I mean, Cindy's tried all sorts of diets too, right? The whole 30, and right. But we really want to make it a family affair, right? We really want to involve the whole family, because if one sibling is able to eat some foods, or it's in the pantry, I mean, it's going to get found. There's going to be hard feelings. It's going to be really hard, right? And what's also amazing too is when we do this diet for families, a lot of times parents feel a lot better, right? Or someone, or they'll notice, like, wow, okay, I didn't realize I was getting up in the morning and my back was achy all morning, right? This is the first time I was able to sleep through the night and wake up refreshed, right? So there are ways to do it. And you know, we really want to look at food as medicine too, right? We want to shift that mindset that we're depriving our kids, right? We want to shift the mindset to one that we're actually feeding and nourishing our kids with this food and taking away the foods that are harming. But I mean, food is so emotional. It's one of the hardest things.
It is.
Right.
I will. A quick story on steroids. When we did a tonsillectomy, you had recommended prednisone at the time for the tonsillectomy, and we expected a kid with a ton of pain and coming out of this tonsillectomy, and he was having taken the prednisone. He was like an angel, and we're you know, we came back going, what's going on? And she's like, oh, it's the prednisone. I mean, the steroid was such. It pulled all the inflammation out, and he was like totally happy that he got the tonsillectomy. So if my son could live on steroids, I think if it weren't didn't have other side effects, it might be.
Well, I mean, this is a comment from Paul, who wrote, we noticed a huge difference with ibuprofen after our child's tonsillectomy. He said, my OCD is gone, right? So that's where the power of anti-inflammatories. But again, ideally, we can't necessarily blast the immune system all the time, right? So this is where step 3, the third phase of keeping the fire down, right? We can, in conventional medicine, we have good ways to blast the immune system, right? Steroids and NSAID medications, you know, rituximab, which is being used for some of the more severe kids. But we don't have any way to modulate the immune response, so that what we want to have happen is, you know, we don't want to suppress the immune system, and then as the steroids wear off or the NSAIDs wear off, they catch another stomach flu, and then they start to flare again. Then we need to give another steroid burst, right? We can do that, but the ideal way would be to then balance it. Part of the immune system that's supposed to come up when inflammation is up and say, hey, look, you fought this infection. Let's come down now to a normal response, not just stay, you know, hyper elevated. But we do, in more kind of natural approaches, have ways to modulate this response, this regulatory response, so that then my goal is to see a kid where they can catch a cold or get a stomach flu and not have a flare, or have like a little blip and you're kind of holding your breath and then it's fine. Right. And those are things like, I mean, IVIG can do that. That's considered a reset for some kids, not all kids, right? But for some kids, that's the reset for the immune system, right? But other ways to reset the immune system, low dose naltrexone can be really helpful for some. There's something called SPMs, or specialized pro-resolving mediators, that are these little fish oil derivatives. You have to take the SPM, not just the fish oil, but that also modulates the immune response. CBD oil has great Th17 balancing properties, also anxiety reducing properties. Chinese skullcap and something called low-dose immunotherapy is being used by some parents. It's a combination of sort of allergy desensitization and homeopathy. But all of these, right, are really, you know, not to bring the immune system down, but to support a balanced immune system, right? So I think that's really important if we're gonna not just get our kids into remission, but keep them there, right? That's what we want to do, right? Because I think, was it you that was just mentioning that was it you, Micah, that you were holding your breath, right? To kind of see, right? I mean, that's what
that's where we are. I mean, we're taking the SPM, we're doing the naltrexone, and she is just at the point. I mean, Zoe and I got the flu A and flu B last year, and
Micah got it really.
I was in the hospital for 5
bad.
days with the flu A. And Ava just chugged along. Like,
That's great.
That's great.
Sorry,
Yeah.
you guys feel bad.
I got my time.
So yeah, I mean, but it was the first time where she didn't completely fall apart. I mean,
That's
a
right.
little bit of flare and stuff, but she also wasn't taking any naproxen at that point, so
Mhm.
we just brought that right back on board.
Yeah.
She was fine, right as rain, and went back to school. So
Yeah.
That's great.
but again, it was like,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, that's, I mean, and I think, and we'll talk about this too, about how we support parents, right?
Right.
Because
Mhm.
I feel like, you know, it's, yes, our kids are in fight or flight mode, but, you know, as parents, I mean, I see you guys come in and my heart breaks for you guys because, I mean, it's like you're walking on eggshells all the time,
Mhm.
like waiting for the next shoe to drop. And I mean, you can't sustain that, right? And that's where having that community, because PANDAS can be so isolating. And, you know, we have
Super isolating.
so
I didn't know
isolating,
about it.
right? And
Or
especially
waiting for the next kid to drop. You
That's
know, like
it, right?
like I'm
Yeah.
looking at my 6-year-old and I'm thinking, you've never had strep before.
yeah.
I like that.
So really, I mean, there's so many tumors, right? Because we have to remember that stress in your child and yourself, that also creates inflammation,
Mhm.
right? So we'll get to that in a little bit too, but the next arm of really, you know, how I approach PANS and PANDAS is then addressing all the other imbalances that our kids have, right? And always there's this gut-brain connection imbalance, right? Because the gut-brain axis is so important. And I did a class, it was 2 weeks ago, on treating anxiety naturally. That's on Facebook and YouTube, and that talks so much about really how when our gut isn't healthy, 80 to 90% of all the serotonin and the dopamine in our body is made by our gut, right? Some of the specific Bifidobacter and Lactobacillus species. And so if our gut is imbalanced and there's abnormal bugs in our gut, and we also have something called leaky gut with lots of food sensitivities, there's no way our brain is going to be healthy, right? So we really, even if they don't have any apparent gut symptoms, like Simon had a constipation, but some kids, like, why am I doing a poop test, right? I don't have, my stomach's fine, right? But it's because it's so important to look at. If we don't test what's in your gut, we're not going to necessarily see it, right? So this was last year, I did a 3-part Facebook Live class on gut health in your kids. You know, if people are really new to that concept of the gut-brain connection, leaky gut, gut dysbiosis, and healing leaky gut with the 5 R's, and I kind of lay it out all there. But a lot of kids have nutritional insufficiencies. If they're not eating, right, or they have sensory issues, eating 2 foods, or they're restricted their eatings, we have to really worry about, are they low in magnesium, which is going to ramp up their anxiety? Are they low in zinc, because that's going to worsen sensory issues? Are they low in iron, which is going to worsen energy and, you know, focus and attention, right? So making sure that we address all of their nutritional insufficiencies. A lot of kids have something called mitochondrial dysfunction. In fact, a lot of these infections, like Epstein-Barr, will poison mitochondria. That sounds kind of heavy, but, you know, it'll stress out our mitochondria, so our cellular energy is not adequate. So some of these kids, I mean, the parents will say, well, they have so much energy, they're so hyper all the time. But what we see is not so much as energy spurts. I'm looking for endurance, right? Can they have those energy spurts and sustain, or do they have those spurts and then they crash? Right? They're like, you know, on the couch, you can't move, and then they have their next spurt, right? Because that's that poor endurance, low tone, the muscle grip, the fine motor pencil grip that you're talking about with Ava. I mean, those are all mitochondrial signs, right? And even young kids, even, you know, elementary school kids, I'll see with thyroid issues or adrenal issues. Detoxification is really key, because a lot of kids will hold on to toxins, like heavy metals or molds and things like that. So all of these things we have to really get your kid's story, right? Because not all kids, I mean, every kid has a different story, but this is where working with a functional medicine practitioner can be really helpful, right? And there's a functional medicine practitioner database that I'll list on the resource list. It's ifm.org. So that's another way to find practitioners who specialize in functional medicine, not necessarily PANS or PANDAS, but they can start getting your child there. And then restoring the body, mind, spirit connection. You know, it's one of the arms that I think is maybe the most important if we're going to really heal, right? And keep our kids in remission and be thriving at the other end, right? Not in this perpetual PTSD state.
Yes.
Right. And so finding a psychiatrist, psychologist who can help your child work with cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT is considered one of the main treatment arms. And the Journal of Pediatric and Adolescent Neuropsychiatry was last year. Their whole journal was on, you know, the treatment arms for PANS and PANDAS, and CBT is one of those arms. It's really important, but you have to find a therapist who's familiar with PANS.
Yes.
Right. It's that can be tricky, you know, because there's not enough practitioners who are familiar and aware of PANS. But that's what we want to make sure that they understand the waxing and waning course of PANS, right? And that there are going to be moments where your kids are on and moments where your kids are just not there, right?
I mean, that's with Simon's CBT therapist. She says sometimes I go and we're going to do the CBT, but sometimes he just needs to talk, and he can't. He's not going to be able to take the lessons. And also, if you're pushing him, which is what CBT does,
yeah,
and he's flaring, it's totally going to backfire. So it is complicated. So a good therapist is key. You see one once a week, and
absolutely. I wish there was a database of, you know, PANS knowledgeable therapists, right? Because it's really challenging to find. I mean, I had one therapist tell this girl who, I mean, her anxiety and, you know, she was cutting and, you know, just really had spiraled and she was not thinking clearly. And when I spoke with him, like, you're not the same kid. I mean, you're absolutely not the same kid. And we started treating her for PANDAS because she had strep, and she came back, right? And was completely her typical athletic, bright self. And her therapist said it can't be PANDAS because it didn't happen overnight. Now, she and the mom had enough fortitude to say, well, it is PANDAS and we're finding another therapist. But some people wouldn't, right? I mean, some people would start doubting and it would be really hard, right? Schools. Okay, so working with the schools is really important. And this is one of the biggest challenges. Actually, Cindy brought a book that's a great resource because, you know, and appropriate, right? This is, and we'll show, but it's by Patricia Rice Duran, PANDAS and PANS in School Settings. Because that's where your kids are spending the majority of their day, right? And so if the teachers and the educators and the administrators are familiar with what PANS and PANDAS is, and again, the flares and when they're on and when they're off, and how the same plan can't be in place, you know, every single day, and that there have to be behavioral plans in place that match what's going on with their kids, it can be really challenging, really challenging.
Yeah, this provides ideas for occupational therapy. It's also, like, I printed out several pages. Several pages for his IEP team. And, you know, one of the things, I believe it's her that says that the only thing consistent about PANDAS and PANS is that it's inconsistent. And they can have amazing days, and the next day, like, Simon doesn't remember a single thing he learned. Like, he'll forget how old he is, which when you're 12 years old, you don't think that's like a big deal. So he was saying he was 10, and what happened to him? And I do think he's lost a lot the last 2 years.
This is, you know, that kind of it's like that behavioral regression where a lot of kids, I mean, some parents will say they know they're starting to flare when they start wanting to watch the cartoons that they did when they were a toddler, right? Or like have that baby talk, you know, start talking like they're, you know, 4 or 5 again, right? That's another little sign. So you guys look at each other. And then family counseling, right? You know, for parents and for siblings, right? When you have siblings who aren't affected, but they're living through this, they're living through the rages and, you know, the ups and downs and the hospital visits, and really trying to figure out what's okay and what's not okay. And when you have younger siblings who might be modeling some of that behavior too. Right. I mean, that can be really challenging. So really having those support systems in place to understand how to manage the siblings' behaviors and mood and, you know, and adjustment to all of that.
And their fear, right?
And their fear.
Like, it's scary for them.
Especially if they were really close and then all of a sudden it's not my brother anymore.
I think that's true. That's what Thomas said. Like, I had to explain once when Simon was being really mean to his brother that that's not really your brother in there. That's, you know, he's not there right now. And then he came back. Claire was over. We had like weeks of really great weeks, and they were best friends again. And then Simon got super sick again. And Thomas came in and said, we lost him again, didn't we? And it was like heartbreaking. But it's true.
It is true. And we have the same thing because I have twin boys, and one has PANS and the other does not. And so for the one that doesn't have PANS, he has had this incredible amount of anger because he
Right.
feels like his partner
Yeah.
is gone. And
Right.
and we really see the developmental difference between the two boys. And
Yeah.
when Alex is on, that spark is there between the two of them again, and it's the same two boys. And then when Alex is in a flare, he's angry. He's really angry.
Yeah, but he's also taken like the caretaker role too.
Exactly.
Right at school, which he shouldn't have to.
Right.
But it's
As a
this
kid,
natural
right?
position that he takes
Yeah.
as a twin brother.
Yeah.
Even as siblings, they feel like our parents are doing so much
Yeah.
for our sibling, we have to be perfect. And so I think
Right.
that puts a lot of stress and anxiety on them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, like Simon has resentment that Thomas has nothing wrong.
Of course.
Yeah.
Exactly.
He's so lucky. Why
Yeah.
doesn't he ever get sick? Why
Yeah.
can he eat bread? Right?
I know. And you know, I've also had this is not necessarily kids with PANDAS, but kids of siblings of kids who have chronic illnesses, and their sibling is needing a lot of medical care, a lot of attention from the parents. And it can be so normal for that sibling to be angry about not being sick, and on a certain level wish they also were sick because they wish that they could have that same attention from mom and dad. So we really need to address those issues head on for the siblings and have the right tools for them. So, and then, you know, support system for and community for the family, right? We were talking about how isolating PANS is, and you know, the PANDAS Network is one place to find support, virtual support, right? There's so many Facebook groups for parents of all the different kinds of PANS that kids are going through, right? Because they're, you know, kids with PANS with Lyme, kids with PANS with, you know, other infections or mold or heavy metals going on, right? And these are, you know, safe lists for parents because I'm not on them, right? I mean, you have to be a parent to be on them. And there are certainly practitioners who have children with PANS and PANDAS who may be on them, right? But these should be safe places for parents to discuss. But at the same time, Cindy brought up a really good point about some of the groups that when you're just starting out on this journey, sometimes it's like, whoa, it's a lot of information, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
well, and you know, they are a great source. I belong to quite a few of the Facebook groups, and I've actually, you have to also start to regulate how much time you spend there as well, because you have an overwhelming sense of, you know, obviously trying to heal your child and in looking for answers and people who have similar stories, but you start to realize how underdiagnosed it is and how the community, you know, there's so many children out there suffering, and it gets heartbreaking, and you start, pretty soon your entire Facebook feed is full of biomedical healing and PANDAS parents groups and so on, and it's overwhelming. And so I do think that's, you know, you do have to regulate it as a parent too.
And I do notice in a lot of the groups, if you put out there, I need to hear a success story today, you'll get a lot of them.
Yes.
So I think that, so they're still on there, still monitoring, but most people, once their kids are better, they're not on this page every day because it is bringing back all the trauma to them. So it's just, you got to remember that kids do get better. Some as quickly as they got sick, they get better.
Well, the other thing too is, you know, I've had to literally like write on a prescription pad for parents, usually mamas, but papas too, that they have to turn off their computer at 11 and go to sleep, right? Because like if parents are sleep deprived and up all night doing research, it's not gonna do anyone any good, right? And you feel like, I just need to look this up, I just need to get more research done, I just need to see if there's something else. But I mean, your brain doesn't work if it's not getting that sleep, and you need to be there for the long haul, right?
And it can be a rabbit hole of looking, because everyone's story is different and everyone's treatment is different. You have to moderate that as well in terms of taking advice and getting support, but not jumping to conclusions that what has worked for one person is necessarily going to work for your child. And that's hard when you're in that acute flare stage, because you're so desperate to have an answer.
And also knowing that there's so many different approaches, right? There's, you know, as we were talking, there's no one size fits all approach. And some people, some parents and families are going to gravitate more towards natural therapies, some more towards really just the pharmaceutical, some more of a blend. And so there are Facebook groups that are kind of really, you know, all all about those different arenas too, right? So kind of picking and choosing also, where you might want to belong. Do you guys have any particular Facebook groups that you found a lot of value in, that you really enjoy being a part of and think they have good information?
There's so many.
I was going to say,
there's so many.
The fact that there are so many, it just shows you how much of a need there is.
I would say there's one where I started initially, which is called PANDAS Parents. It's probably the easiest one to find. But they've gotten somewhat religious around it being just PANDAS. And so other groups have been forming that are more kind of broader, PANS with Lyme and other co-infections and so on, which is more applicable for us. And then there's others around the sort of biomedical healing and different ones around certain treatments that people are.
PANDAS IVIG.
IVIG success stories and how to, when they've succeeded in getting it covered by insurance and all sorts of different groups. And there's actually one that's just trends in PANS, and they seem to mostly post polls to try and gather information. So there are all sorts of different approaches.
Well, and this is where, I think you also finding a practitioner who's open to hearing about some of the possible treatment options. I mean, what I always would want, like, you guys, my patients, to feel comfortable saying, hey, I read about this treatment on a Facebook group. What do you think? And if I've never heard of it, I'm going to do the research, right? Because we don't know all the answers, right? And also conventional medicine doesn't necessarily have all the answers, because there's kids who are not doing well on conventional treatment. So really looking into, and this is kind of the last piece of it, right? Really being open to exploring complementary and alternative therapies, but hopefully you have a practitioner you can kind of run through those things and make sure that they're safe. They're not going to interact with anything that your child is on, but being open to things like homeopathy and essential oils, acupuncture, Reiki, chiropractic, prayer. I mean, whatever we can do. I mean, there's so much more to healing than we know about, in like the physical realm. And so I think that, when we can incorporate these other alternatives, and it really, it takes a team, right? I mean, there is not going to be a single practitioner that knows all the answers. And, there may be points where I say, what, I need you to consult with so-and-so, or, I just don't know. Let's consult with this person who specializes in X, Y, or Z, right? So you want a practitioner who's open to collaborating. What I do recommend, though, for parents who are really working with multiple practitioners, just to pick one practitioner who's your lead. Right. And and I tell parents, it doesn't have to be me. Like, I have no ego invested. Like, I don't have to be the lead, but just one person who can kind of oversee and help you manage and organize your thoughts and really manage the treatment plan, because some of the treatment plans can get really complicated. And if there's too many practitioners without a central point, it really feels like there's too many cooks in the kitchen, and it gets chaotic. And unfortunately, I don't see kids with that approach doing as well as kids who can really have one practitioner as the cheerleader, the researcher, and helping to manage. Right. Okay, so there's a lot of information here. We as a group are working on a list of resources. If you guys are, listening and you have any resources that you're like, oh, we love this website, we love this book, we love this, handout, then let us know, because, we want to try to compile something that's really useful for everyone. And I know some of you guys had asked, can I do like a master class on treatments? I'll work on it, but if you would like to do that, then just make sure. Oh, and also the resource list. I'll put it on the Facebook page, but you can also just sign up for the newsletter, because then I'll email it out as soon as it's available on the Healthy Kids, Happy Kids site. And I just have a couple of things before we move on to our mamas and our Papa hero. Just a couple of last words to all of you guys listening. Not last words, but just to really not give up, right? If some of these things that we're talking about spark some, like aha moments that I think this could be going on, then trying to find a practitioner that can really help you do the detective work, right? Because you can't do the detective work by yourself. So keep looking for those answers, find the right team for you. This is not anything that you or your kids signed up for. So, it takes a lot of courage, like you guys all have, right? To keep going and just to really keep on this journey. So just knowing that, like steeling yourself up for that and finding the right supports for yourself. not letting anyone tell you or your kid that they're crazy, right? Really important. And I know there are practitioners listening here too. So I just want to thank the practitioners who are listening, thinking, okay, how do I really get into treating this more, understanding more about it. The PANDAS Physician Network is an awesome resource. They do grand rounds. They have, you know, the treatment, the articles that I was talking about, tons of great resources. So that's something as a practitioner you can sign up for. And there's a fairly active listserv. So we'll get to some of these questions, but before we do that, I just want to play a trailer while we take a little sip of water. And then if you guys have seen the movie or the trailer to My Kid Is Not Crazy, give us a heart or thumbs up. I think if you're thinking that your child might have PANS or PANDAS, or if they do and you want to try to educate your friends, practitioner, there's a question here on how do I educate my practitioner. Have them watch the movie, right? Because there's some amazing practitioners from the NIH, from Stanford. I mean, these are not, disrespected institutions, right? I mean, these are highly regarded institutions with practitioners and researchers who are talking about PANS and PANDAS. So I'm going to stop this screen share, and then I'm going to go on and share the movie right now. Okay, here we go.
PANDAS hell is a really, really dark, scary, and isolated place.
Your normal life is suddenly gone overnight. Your friends don't understand why.
He was a completely different kid. It was looking at a different kid in the same body.
There was no way that they could conceive of the possibility that he was not like that 2 weeks ago.
Kids are not supposed to be perfectly healthy one day and then completely tormented and very psychiatrically ill the next.
I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
PANDAS, it stands for Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorders Associated with Strep. What happens is you get strep throat, you get symptoms like OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. It's a horrible thing to have and more people should know about it.
Mom, make it stop. Mom, please help me. A 7-year-old child should not be telling you this.
He couldn't do anything but just stand there and be helpless.
Raging at us because she was starving.
Point's pulling her hair out. I want to die, Daddy.
I can't think right. Everything gets jumbled.
When I couldn't sit down, they would put me in like this dark room, like a timeout room. And I couldn't eat, and they were serving fried catfish that night. And I couldn't eat it, and that was my favorite food.
Kids with PANDAS, they don't leave their bedroom sometimes. They can't leave their house. They've given up playing with their friends. They are psychiatric cripples.
It's tragic when a child has PANDAS. People say, your child doesn't have PANDAS, it doesn't exist. So they give them all kinds of psychiatric drugs, which makes them even worse and worse and worse.
Zoloft, Prozac, Lamictal, Cymbalta. When's it gonna kick in? When's it gonna work? And I think now that we look back, that was a big clue. It wasn't working because they were not treating the actual problem.
Part of the reason it's so controversial is I think everybody knows this is an important disease that has kind of been missed.
It changes the way we think about mental disorders actually forever.
Sure enough, they take her back, they swab her throat, and 2 days later they're calling us and telling us that she had strep. And we were like, that's too much of a coincidence.
You have a choice between doing a throat culture and treating it when positive, or consigning a child to an entire lifetime of mental illness. Yes, I think that's irresponsible.
Who's here for our kids? We're lacking doctors.
Because you're so tired every day to read papers and understand stuff and talk to doctors and say, listen, figure this out. I'm tired to read this shit and explain it to you. Just do something for my kid.
Every doctor out there, we don't know. Your kid is crazy.
Okay, so as hard as that is for us to watch, right? I mean, you guys live that, and you have lived that, and a lot of the parents listening are living that now, and I think that's where we really need to make sure that we, on this day, PANDAS and PANS Awareness Day, that we get this message out to parents and practitioners and educators that we need to have more knowledge of what this is and catch things early. There wasn't, when kids were diagnosed or when parents found out about PANS and PANDAS, it was almost none of the time was it from the educator, right? And that's, I think, one of the first places that it can become evident if teachers know what this is. And I think, at our school, there's more awareness now. And so hopefully things will be jumped on sooner if there are any younger kids where there are some problems happening. But yeah, we need to do a lot more education around this. So I know, we went through some of how, your kids presented, right? Is there anything that you guys want to share about just finding the diagnosis, and, did you have any difficulty in finding practitioners? And I know we knew each other for a while, and I took care of Ava since she was a baby, right? So,
but Ava had a lot of the leaky gut, and so that was one of the reasons why we came to you, is because I had this kid, and I've been a nurse for 23 years, always caring for women and children, and I had no idea about PANDAS until I got your email saying, we need to talk. and I'm like, oh no. But just, I really wish that more people knew the thought of children suffering needlessly is hard for me. And, Ava suffered, but it has been a finite amount of time. And I've always been grateful that I've had you in the foxhole with me, but we're warriors. We've been fighting a war, and it's been an enemy that you can't see. And you never know when it's going to approach you from a different angle or when you least expect it. And so there is this sense of a shoe dropping, that you're just kind of white knuckling it until let me enjoy this as long as I can. And gee, I hope she doesn't lose the ability to write her name again. And, you see her. Last week she ran for 3rd grade student council, and it was her idea. And she was so proud so I could tell you that she wrote her speech herself and she typed it on the computer. But I remember that I had to reteach her 4 times in the 1st grade to what the letter A looked like so she could start to write her name again. And those flares were just incessant. And so, and she's aware of that. And the message that she sent today, and she told me I had to quote her.
Get the credit.
8 years old, I had to quote her. But she said to tell people that PANDAS is a really bad disease, but you can defeat PANDAS. And I'm glad that she feels powerful against it, because I don't always feel powerful against it.
And I think it's hard, our story I mentioned earlier about Dr. Song wasn't around in our lives yet when we first went to see our other pediatrician, and being told, like, don't worry about it, it'll just go away. And like, just trusting your gut that there's, and looking for answers. I mean, I think no offense, but I think mamas have the gut instinct a little more. I mean,
Ron's got a pretty good gut.
He's a pretty good gut, but we talked about it, and he'd be like, well, we would debate back and forth. Is this, and so you start to question. And then I remember when you did initial testing, Dr. Song, and you said, I know when we were telling you some of the symptoms and the frequent urination and stuff, and you were like, I think this might be PANDAS. And I remember having this sigh of relief in the moment, like, oh, thank God it's something. Because I just thought we were, I just didn't know what, I thought you were going to say, yeah, sorry, I don't know. But when you said it could be the same, I didn't know how horrific it was at the time. I didn't know, the journey, I guess, we were going to be on, or how long it would take to find healing. But at least being sort of validated that it was something, and you knew what it was such a relief.
I remember that exact moment, because we came to see you for constipation, which we had no idea was PANDAS at the time. You resolved the constipation almost instantly. I was like, oh, she's amazing, and then we're fine. So we moved on, and then several years later, he got diagnosed with dyslexia, which we now think was actually brain inflammation, not typical dyslexia, and he and then got him in a special school for dyslexia, and he was doing great. And then all of a sudden, it's just like 1 month he went, off the deep end. And they wanted to put us on prescription medication for anxiety, and I just felt sick about it. And I'm like, I'm gonna go see Dr. Song, because, she has alternative ways to treat, anxiety. And we also were trying to get to UCSF to do like a group that looked at different diseases and conditions that could cause mental health issues. And they needed all this lab work. So I came in, and there was like, oh my God, there was like 20 things they wanted to test for. And you're like, I don't think it's any of these, but I'm going to test for PANDAS. And the labs are coming back. We look one on one, and everything's fine. Everything's normal. And then strep came back, and it was not normal at all. And I remember you're like, PANDAS. I was like, awesome. And you said, not awesome. No, not awesome. This is not a good diagnosis. This is a long journey. And it didn't hit me until I was at the pharmacy, and I got the prescription for antibiotics, which when Dr. Song recommends antibiotics for years,
yes,
you're like, multiple antibiotics.
We're now friends with the pharmacist.
Yes,
we all
know.
So
they all know me. They all know Simon. But they said you're gonna have to come back every week, because he did liquids, and they had to mix it for me. Yeah, I just started bawling like every week.
Yep.
So my pharmacist lets me fix it.
Yes, you know how to.
You're a nurse. You can do it.
Yeah.
They give me the whole month supply and do some distilled water.
Yeah, they do that now too.
Well, it's interesting. We suspected that there was something going on with Alex, but I remember you guys came for New Year's Eve, and I said to you that I had this feeling that something was going on, and our boys had started kindergarten together. They were the same age, and so there was a relationship there. And Amy was sharing her story of what had been happening, and she mentioned Dr. Song, and I said, oh, I've been thinking about calling her, and I've been thinking that I should do this. And it was you kind of pushed me to really send that first email.
You're our savior.
You are our savior.
We're not done yet.
I
know. So did you guys feel any pushback from friends or family members?
Oh yeah.
Because I know a lot of doctors. That my friend group is physicians and nurses.
Well, because Maika's a nurse, right? So she's surrounded by the medical
There was
field.
just a lot of, and not even negative pushback, but just like, well, you know what? I wouldn't marry yourself to that diagnosis because it's really controversial. And I'm just like, okay.
The controversial part is so frustrating, I think, because
it is.
So when I'm talking to friends who are talking about this, I say, don't worry too much about the diagnosis. I mean, I think the diagnosis can be helpful, but it's the treatment. You've got to find that underlying infection. And so if people want to debate all day about whether to call it PANDAS or PANS or AAE, whatever you want to call it, you debate the fact that there's these underlying infections causing the brain inflammation, and that you just have to go to. So as I hear of some friends who are kind of going down this journey, and they're doing all the treatment around the inflammation, I just keep going back to, we got to find that infection, or what's the trigger, and treat that at the same time, or the inflammation is just a Band-Aid, or treating the inflammation, and so there is just a Band-Aid.
Well, and I think also understanding that what you identify as your first trigger, sometimes once you start to treat that, you uncover other things that are hidden. And that's one piece that's so frustrating about this condition, is that it's constantly evolving as you discover the different components of it.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I mean, Ava, it's mostly strep and she has the Lyme background, right? Yeah. But for all of you guys, we've uncovered more infections as we've gone along, right? And so, I mean, and a lot of times it's Lyme and it's co-infections, which unfortunately there's controversy around that. So that kind of closes the door a lot of times for, you know, a lot of practitioners who, you know, might have maybe been a little bit more open. So it is frustrating. But, you know, we've done some additional tests to find different infections that may be colonizing the nose or bloodborne infections that we would never have known about, right? So it just, you know, it's just to say that if your kids are getting better and then they plateau or they have a regression, don't just say, oh, it's this coming back. It might be something new, right? Because when we have this autoimmune tendency, it's not just that you're going to have an autoimmune reaction to one infection. Many infections can trigger that autoimmune reaction. Right. So in terms of thinking about treatments that, you know, your kids have gone through, have there been any treatments that you feel like, okay, this was a really great treatment, this did not work, you know, this was a game changer, like anything that you would say was really one of the important pieces to look at, knowing that, you know, every kid has a different journey, but you know, are there some big hitters that parents want to think about?
I think for Simon it was azithromycin, which is, I mean, he went from being like a disaster and 3 days later being pretty much back to normal. I mean, the writing wasn't back to normal, but pretty stable. And then after a while, he got exposed to strep again, and so we got strep again, so we switched the azithromycin. And I think that we ended up going back on it. And now, like, that's going to be the last thing he goes off. I'm so afraid what happens when that goes away. But, and, you know, there were times that ibuprofen was, again, like 20 minutes after taking it, he would be fine.
Absolutely.
Now that doesn't have
as much
benefit anymore. But for us, I don't think it was one thing. One thing I would advise though is keeping a journal of the things you've tried. And so we had kept one, and we would always, as we would prepare for appointments, kind of think through what was working, what wasn't, what had we introduced new. And so I went back through it in advance of this meeting and started to write down all the things we've tried. And it's a page and a half printed out of all the things that, you know, addressing their kind of the infections, different things, addressing their long-term immune system, addressing the inflammation, what are other gut health things we've done, other, you know, crazy things. We've tried so many things, from, you know, camel's milk to osteopathy to, you know, we're doing TRS now, and that has, we think, having some help removing some toxins. We did IVIG once with Alex.
Did you guys order stuff from New Zealand?
We've ordered.
we
haven't talked about that. Our daughter, who's a little bit of an atypical panda in terms of how she represents or shows up, she has, we think, some biofilm that's not allowed. Like, pharmaceutical antibiotics don't really work for her, so we haven't been able to find one that will kill the strep. And so we're doing this whole biofilm protocol with these pine needle medicines from Australia. And so, you know, you have to be open to trying different things, and it is hard to know always what exactly is working. It's probably not one thing, it's probably a combination of a lot of things.
Well, and so what Amy's referring to is it's a pine needle extract called Taiga, Taiga. And some of the practitioners in Australia, I think it's from New Zealand, but the Australian practitioners are finding good success with PANDAS, with strep. And so that's one thing that I had you guys order, and also Cistus tea from Sardinia. But the Cistus tea, when you read about the benefits, CISTUS, it has some really great not just antimicrobial properties, but the immune modulating properties, right? What I really want for kids to balance their immune system out. So I think that's one I've been using more. But if you guys aren't familiar listening with what biofilms are, basically organisms will live in community and create this mucousy-like material around themselves, very simplified description, but we can see in our pipes, right, that kind of sludge on pipes, that's biofilm. There's lots of organisms kind of teeming inside there, and they're kind of walling themselves off. So we know pretty much any organism can create a biofilm around itself. There can be multiple organisms inside the biofilm, and biofilms can be anywhere. They can be in our blood, they can be in our sinuses, they can be behind our ears, right?
Is this just the gut? Or?
No, they can be in our gut, right?
Okay.
So when we see improvement with antimicrobial treatment, and then we stall, or we start to backslide, or we think, oh, things are great, and we try to pull off antibiotics for a little bit, and then 2 weeks later things are coming back, then I have a suspicion for biofilm, right? Because what happens when you use antibiotics, herbs or pharmaceutical, they'll kill the free-floating organisms, but they don't punch into the biofilm. So then after you stop the antibiotics, then the organisms in the biofilm start to multiply, and then they release, and then you start seeing symptoms back. Right. And so what Amy's talking about in terms of a biofilm protocol, it's a little, it takes time. I mean, it's a little complicated, but you basically take these enzymes that will punch holes in the biofilm on an empty stomach. Right. So that's key. It has to be in an empty stomach because you don't want it digesting food. Then about an hour later, you take whatever your killing agent is, right? Your antimicrobial. And then it's nice an hour later to mop it up with some activated charcoal. Right. So that's kind of a simplified biofilm protocol. There's another thing that we look at if kids just aren't moving, right? These are kids who try everything. It's like nothing's happening, right? It's like they really are stuck. And then that's something that's not as well known, but it's called hypercoagulability, where the organisms will literally activate your clotting system. So they form these clots around themselves. And we see a lot of kids with PANS and PANDAS have elevated D dimers and other elevations in clotting factors. Right. And so when that happens, certain enzymes that can break these clots can help release those organisms from hiding. But you want to be ready with your antimicrobial, right? Because if you imagine they've built this fortress around themselves, you tear down the fortress and then there could be a flood of loose. Right. But that's where if parents are listening and they're getting stuck, right? Their kids aren't getting better. Maybe they got better a little bit and then they're not moving. Think about biofilms and think about hypercoagulability. Those are kind of a little bit later in the stage, but those are some things that we might think about.
Advanced topics.
Yes.
Advanced
To your question, though, we have noticed SPM active has been that has been with us.
It really has.
And when we've run out of that, it is definitely noticeable. Like that has a positive impact.
Yeah. So SPM active, right? I mean, I think it can be one of the game changers in that immune system modulation, and that stands for specialized pro-resolving mediators. And right now, there's only one manufacturer that has like I don't know what you call it, the patent or the license to manufacture it. It's Metagenics, right? And so Metagenics has your SPM active. Unfortunately, it's not cheap, right? And so for now, we're kind of stuck with that. And I know a lot of these treatments, as parents are watching, right? They're expensive, and they're seeing other practitioners, right? And lots of supplements and medications. But if you want to target some of what you're doing, SPM active can be really helpful. Again, it's not for all kids, but for some kids, it can really be that, okay, the inflammation's down, let's keep it down, and it evens out the playing field, right? So it's not so rocky anymore. Right?
Exactly. We found great benefit from the naltrexone.
Yeah,
we saw that. And in the beginning, I would say the steroids were helpful in the beginning to kind of get him to a certain point. One thing I will say that's interesting is when you're entering into this, everyone talks about IVIG as being the
holy grail,
of what's going to save you. And we ended up doing 3 rounds, and I found that the first one was really helpful, and we saw a big boost. And then he was re-exposed to strep, and within 2 weeks of going back to school, and it just knocked him back down. But we've seen a big benefit over the last couple of weeks, like 6 weeks. And people have talked about you have to wait that 6 months or so and really build up all the other components as well, all the other supplements. And so we're questioning if maybe that was part of it. But when you're waiting for that holy grail, it's so hard you expect it to start the next day.
Right. Well, I think that's one of the support groups talks about. Some kids see benefit from IVIG almost immediately.
Right.
And those kids are usually the ones that need it every 2 weeks for like a year before they can start weaning off it. And there's other kids who don't see benefits for like a month, and those are the ones who then don't need IVIG for a year or until flu season. And so when Simon wasn't getting better, I was like, yes, he's the one who's going to have it for long term. And then, no, I mean, we think it made him worse. Like looking at the blood work, he was worse after. So that was
So
exactly.
Holy grail.
It's not one size fits all.
It's not a one size fits all.
I found that Ava had so many sensory components to her flares. I took her to have an eye checkup, and just to make sure that she could see, because I'm like, well, you just can't. Everything was blurry to her, and backwards and upside down and out of proportion. And he happened to do a lot of work with kids that had sensory disorders, and so there were a lot of therapies that he offered through visual means. And so Ava has glasses that have no correction. They're blue. The lenses are blue. And it really helps her in school with the lighting, and especially when her pupils are bigger. I found that really helped to decrease the amount of stuff that was coming into her brain from a stimulation standpoint. And then there was also light therapy at nighttime, because we would get the rage at home. And, you know, she would hold it to, you ask any of her teachers from kindergarten, they'll say, Ava is like the quietest, most special, you know, perfect child. But she'll hit that car, and it was like she hated me or something, and she hated her sister. It was because she had held it together all day, and then she had to release. But she would say, get the blue light, like, then get the red one. Like she was really, she knew that she needed something to really help her. And then she would put it on before bed, and she would just stare at it, and it would really calm her. And so there were a lot of therapies, even eye patching, having her walking around.
Blue light before bed or red light before bed?
She would do the blue.
Isn't that like the exact opposite of what? Like,
I mean, there's the blue light from the screen, but I don't know if this is a different.
No, it's a different blue light.
Yeah.
It's almost indigo. Yeah, it almost looks like a black light that you.
It's like is it called Irwin lenses, or what is it?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So this is where, I mean, right? I certainly will not ever say I know everything. So this is where, you know, something's been helpful. It's
super helpful,
right?
To the point where I almost wanted to buy my own machine, but so I just rent it when we need it.
Now, what about, so let's talk about just living in the community with schools, with PANS and PANDAS, right? So let's talk about schools, right? Because, I mean, most kids who are diagnosed with PANS and PANDAS are going to be in school, whether it's starting elementary or middle school, typically, right? So what have you found to be the most important things that the schools, the educators, the administrators have to know about and really implement either into a 504 or an IEP plan?
What we have found really helpful is we piloted last year with our school something called an IHP, which is an individualized health plan, and it actually sits alongside his IEP, and it's focused specifically on things when he's in a flare for school aversion. He will it addresses tardies, it addresses infections in the classroom, it addresses how they clean in the classroom, it addresses what happens with field trips, and particularly overnight field trips, because we have a lot of that in our school. And we have found that to be incredibly helpful in really outlining for the educators exactly what is needed for Alex. And it also helped, I think, explain the risk of infection. Which I think a lot of people don't understand, that it's not just, if you have PANDAS, it's not just strep that can trigger your child. You kind of need to know any infection that's taking place in the classroom that can cause a flare.
Yeah. San Jose Unified had a really rough year with a noro-like virus.
My gosh,
yes.
And they shut down several schools. And I had to take Ava out for 2. It's the first time she's ever really missed school. She went through her first PANDAS year, and she didn't miss one day of school.
Really?
Even with the flares, she would. That was, I think, part of her OCD was that she needed to stay on schedule. There has to be structure. So even if she wasn't feeling well, she would medicate herself to get to school. But yeah, I had to take her out for 2 weeks because they just couldn't get this virus under control. And so having the flexibility of doing that and having a plan in place around that was super helpful. But I didn't know anything about IEPs before this, and we didn't really put one in place for her until towards the end of first grade, and had already been over a year that she had had the diagnosis. But we saw that she was going to need some support, particularly her comfort was being able to go to the nurse as much as possible. And the nurse started to be more present at the school. I've just had tremendous support, considering that it's a public school system. I've just had tremendous support.
Yeah, I think explaining, having a meeting with a team. So Simon was at this private school for dyslexia. There's 14 kids with 2 teachers. And the teachers know him really well. And when I brought him to middle school, where he has 7 teachers and 1,200 kids, 35 kids in a class, I was really nervous about how that was going to go. And explaining to them that, his handwriting might be okay one day and the next day be a disaster. And that's not him being lazy. That's not a sign of him not trying. And if you tell him he's not trying, then you're going to send him into an emotional flare. Have a word to hurt. So I think, so explaining how inconsistent it is and the different types of things, and that he needs a bathroom pass. Don't challenge him when you have to go to the bathroom, because then he's going to be paranoid the whole time. So I do think them understanding the full gamut, and that's where this was good, because some of these things Simon hadn't done yet. I was like, well, I better put it in there.
Right.
because they might.
Just to remind parents, this is by Patricia Rice, PANDAS and PANS in the school setting. Some ideas of things to implement. This is a handbook for educators, right? Because I think the PANDAS physician network, for practitioners who are listening, they also have a letter from practitioners to be able to write to the schools, which sometimes, schools want to serve our children, right? And so it should hopefully not be a combative arrangement, right? But sometimes it just takes the doctor's note saying, look, this is what PANS and PANDAS is.
When they need it legally for tardy insurance issues.
They do.
So there's a letter that, as a practitioner, you can just cut and paste and send off.
Well, and there's a group called the New England PANDAS and PANS Association, and they have a number of great resources on their website for educators to say this is what PANDAS and PANS looks like in the classroom. I think that's great. But I would also team with that and say the educators it's a struggle for the educators to work with our kids and help our kids in the classroom. And they do, many of them, in my experience, they have all been fantastic. But I think one thing that was also really helpful was developing empathy for the other learners, the other students, and so that they understand what's going on. So for example, when my Alex had his first IVIG, she allowed him to talk about it in the classroom and for me to come in and explain it and to educate them. And they would send emails back and forth while he was out for IVIG to understand how he was feeling and what was going on. And it built this tremendous support system for my son, so that when he went back to class, he felt he wasn't embarrassed. And he's not embarrassed to say, I don't feel well, I need to go to the office, or my stomach's hurting, or I'm having joint pain, or it normalizes it to make it okay.
And we read In a Pickle for PANDAS, even for, which seems like it's for young kids, but even for 5th graders, like when Simon started missing a lot of school, like several days a week, I read it to the class, because they were like, why are you never here? And are you in the hospital?
Right.
He didn't want to answer all the questions. And Simon ended up getting pulled out of school last March. So he wasn't able to go at all for 3 months, and now he's going. So, but I do think I can't do that with 7 different teachers.
Right,
Kids in
of
class.
course.
Middle school.
Exactly, middle
So it's
school's
harder,
different.
Yeah.
but there are opportunities to educate the parents by promoting topics. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, we've had an incredibly supportive school, but our kids a little bit differently have not wanted to talk too much about it. I think there's still, it's hard to talk about. They don't know necessarily how to explain it. They probably should, or but I think they've been a little reluctant to share too much about it a little bit. I mean, and it's tough. Mental health is a tough thing, and they don't always know how to give words. I've had parents, come and ask me, do they really have Lyme? Like kind of questioning me. Yeah. But I don't, you don't want to kind of put it all out there for fear of your kid being kind of labeled or there's definitely, you want to be an advocate, but at the same time, you want to maintain their privacy. So we actually asked their permission before coming tonight, just to make sure, right? But the schools have been, although initially very uninformed, have been very open to learning. And although they can't always share information, they can't at all share information about other families, they will often say, this is helping. They're the more of us that come in with this problem, they're starting to connect dots with other children, be more informed and better prepared for, now that it's been 3 years that we've had 504 meetings, they're like, yeah, we have other children now, and it's helpful for them to learn from us. And,
well, the schools, I mean, if they don't have or know that they have a child with PANS in their school, I mean, they will soon.
Yes.
It's unfortunately, it seems like it's, it's just increasing so rapidly, and I think, hopefully better recognized. But we were talking tonight, and we all live in San Carlos, and that there's this cluster here, right? So, and it's where you guys live.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's a 8 to 10 children within a kind of half-mile radius that all have some version of PANS, and
those are only the confirmed.
And those are the only ones we know, right? That we've learned through networking and word of mouth. And so we, we've got to figure out if there's obviously an environmental piece, there's a genetic piece, there's an infectious piece, but what's going on, because this is expanding a lot.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, with autoimmunity, we know that it's not just, many autoimmune illnesses are triggered by infections, right? We know that, rheumatoid arthritis can be triggered by Klebsiella or Citrobacter species in the gut. I mean, there are certain infections that we know can trigger various autoimmune phenomena, but it's not just you get the infection and all of a sudden you have the autoimmune illness. There's some like backstory to the immune system, right? Many things that stress the immune system and the gut along the way. And then the infection was basically the straw that broke the camel's back, right? So what I wonder in this area, are there some, pesticides leaking through the creeks in the, or the waterway, or the electric lines, or something that's common to that area that's just tweaking our kids' immune systems enough that they're not as resilient to these infections and not reacting to these infections in an appropriate way. And that's my biggest question that I want to know, right? Because it's not like strep is new. We probably all had strep as kids, right? And again, there are adults who can remember having these PANDAS-like episodes, right? But that wasn't the norm for us, right? And to go on to have, chronic infections and all of these autoimmune illnesses that kids are facing nowadays. I mean, there's, it's not just PANS and PANDAS. It's like, I saw a 6-month-old who was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, right? 18-month-old with ulcerative colitis. I mean, it's all autoimmune illnesses. So I think we somehow, as a community, as a society, need to wake up and figure out like what's going on with our kids, right? Because it's something we're doing, whether it's EMFs or pollution or pesticides, glyphosate. I mean, who knows? Heavy metals. I mean, maybe it probably is all of them, right? So. But in that cluster, it's just, there's got to be something, there's some evidence as to what's going on there, right? So one of the things I think, that's challenging for educators and challenging for therapists, but for parents too, right? It's like really separating out what your child can't do because of their illness versus what they won't do because now it's become maybe a habit or behavior that's been ingrained. Or fear, right? And distinguishing that and knowing when to be tough and when to cut some slack, Right. So how do you manage that?
Yeah.
What do you guys have for us?
Yeah.
You don't.
Yeah.
You try, right? I think for our daughter, right, I think it's a little bit easier in that usually her eyes tell a story, right? If the pupils are large, it's like, okay, can't push, right? It doesn't present the same way with our son, right? And so I think it's, it's a fine line, and oftentimes it's just to get right up to the edge, and it's like, okay, I'm not going any farther.
Well, it's tough because, grandparents would say, oh, you just need to punish them, or, for certain behaviors. And as a parent, it's tough because you want to support them, and you don't always know, but there's sometimes just a gut check on knowing that this is something they just can't handle this right now, and not making it easy, but knowing when to let off, and it's a tough line to walk.
For sure. It really is.
I think I met with a therapist when we were having a particularly hard time, and I think I talked to her, and it's so much loss for us, loss of this experiences we're supposed to have with our children, loss of being able to get in the morning and get him out the door, which is hard enough, but having to get all their meds and spend hour every week in your spreadsheet sorting the different medications and treatments and doctor's appointments, and there's a ton of loss, and even when they're better, you just have this fear of when is it going to change, or when is something going to happen. And I think that my therapist says, you really have to focus on this moment. You can't start worrying about, because he's in this math class now, will he be able to go to college? You can't, because he can't now, how is he going to get a job, right? She's like, you got to focus on where he's at right now. And, because if you're down here, you're not helping anybody. And it's hard. It's hard when you're there. Same thing. Like, we try and do, if he has a fever, then it means he's sick, and otherwise we think he's just avoiding and push it, but that doesn't always work.
I've tried to be really consistent with Ava, not only for her sake, but for her sister's sake, just to so that we're all on the same expectation plane. Even when she wasn't feeling well and she'd come home and we'd get rage, I'd say all the time, you can't give all your friends and strangers your best and then come home and give us your worst. You can't. It's not sustainable for us, and we want to be here, but we got to be a team. And so it's always about, we're the Ramirez girls. We stick together. We're and there's this solidarity that I'm always driving. Even when it's hard, you still have a standard that has to be. And she has, in a lot of ways, risen to the challenge. Now she has a lot of volatility in her mood and her ability to manage her tone, or no filter. And we just had a meeting at school about that today, literally at 3:30. And but I don't know her, and that was the thing that I didn't realize. This happened so young that I don't really know what her baseline is in terms of personality. So I don't know if she would have been like this without PANDAS, or if I don't know. And so for me, it's like, it's not worth yelling over. I can't fight every battle, and I have to give her the benefit of the doubt. I have to, and I have to encourage the people around her, whether it's family or friends or people that say, you need to be more strict with her. I'm consistent with her, and that's the best I can do, because if I yell at her all the time, even if it is her being not nice on purpose, it gets her so stressed out. It's a double-edged sword. Then she's ramped up and she's stressed, and then we're in a circle.
I always try to remind myself, and it's not always easy. We're not perfect by any means, but sometimes they wouldn't be doing this on purpose. They're not trying to make my life difficult by not wanting to put their shoes on, or wear these socks, or change their clothes, or go to the bathroom 3 times before we leave, or whatever the thing is. They're not doing this to it's not purposeful. And so I always try to, like, okay, they wouldn't choose this either if they could. And so I try to be sympathetic, but at the same time, you can't be the source of the rage all the time, and it wears you down.
Well, and you have to teach them to recognize what is pain from the condition and pain from anxiety, and how you push through that, and when you need to push yourself versus coming to me to have me help define that. And I think that's where we've made the biggest advances over the past year. But it's you know, I think that one of the most important things I can teach him is to be able to find a way to self-regulate, and that's so hard for them.
Yeah. But one of the things that I see with kids who have to go through these struggles, and you guys as parents have to work through these struggles with them and with the therapist, is they come out with so many more tools than kids who don't have to go through these struggles to manage the hard times and manage the stress, right? Because stress is not a bad thing per se. It's what we do with it, and the tools we develop. And you know, I'm always amazed at, you know, the tools that kids with PANS and PANDAS and anxiety and OCD or whatever it is they have, that they really need to get just to manage, right?
Yeah, well, if that's the bright side, I think the bright side for us is that I know for me, I'm much more appreciative of the good times and things that I would have taken for granted, like you were talking about, you know, this sort of the expectation of normal parenting things. Now, when we're having a good week, wow, we went out to dinner together. Nobody fought, and we're, you know, and we're like good, and there was no meltdown. I mean, these small things that you sort of assumed naturally would happen as a parent that have been harder for us, I'm much more appreciative of.
I also think, you know, as a parent, what I see you guys doing, and you know, Mike, I know, you know, you're doing all this on your own, right? But I mean, to have a partner who is so supportive, right? You can help with some of the laying out the supplements and the day-to-day and the driving, and you know, have a run, right? With you. You know, but you know, whoever it is, I mean, finding that support person, whether it's, you know, grandma or whether it's a friend or someone, right? And also making sure that you guys get the breaks, right? That you plan a date night, or you go for a run, or you know, you read a book in peace, right? I mean, just finding that time to recover and have the strength to keep going on. So as we kind of wrap up on this PANDAS Awareness Day, I'd just love each of you guys to share, what's that message that you want parents to hear? What do you want them to know on this day?
Well, I'll start. I would say, and this kind of goes back to the school topic, but it also ties in with family, friends, and trying to build that network. It's just awareness and education. As much as, you know, time we've all invested in trying to figure this thing out, to be able to give some of that knowledge to others, I think it can be doubly hard. And again, even in the school setting, right, you can try and build awareness, but you had said earlier, they tend to hold it together there. With other people. They go to grandma and grandpa's and they're great, right? And then they come home and, right? And so I think, you know, other people struggle to believe sometimes, right? So just continuing to reinforce and find those people who are really going to be by your side.
Yeah, I guess my biggest thing is a little bit back to when we first found out, and thinking that now that we know what it is, oh, this is the answer. And it's a journey. It is a journey, and don't, you know, keep trying and try different things, and, you know, you will find the things that work. And Dr. Song said to me when we did Alex's last work, she said, you realize, like, this means he doesn't have, like, the strep is gone. Like, you realize, you know, I was like, oh, wait, he doesn't have PANDAS anymore? What? Like, I mean, he still has some other, you know, things we're working through to heal him. But after 3 years of being on antibiotics and all these treatments, like, you know, you can find, healing, and doesn't mean it's going to be overnight, but there's hope, and keep trying.
Those are awesome.
Finally.
I think for me, the biggest piece is you're not alone. There are other people going through this, and especially in the beginning, it's so isolating because the symptoms are very severe, and you almost don't want to believe them yourself, and you definitely don't want to verbalize them because you don't want your kid to be judged, and you don't want to be judged, and you start to second guess everything. And just recognize that there is a network of people out there who have gone through this and who understand, and like you said, that believe you and your child are not crazy. There is something that is causing this.
Yeah, I think for me, what's sort of kept me through it, one, my husband's been amazing, but just knowing that he's in there. Like, even when he goes away, he's there. And there's times that he can really show it, and times he can't, but he's got the biggest heart, and it's attacked like every part of his body, but his heart is still there. So.
It is. It's amazing.
I certainly feel the alone part is important because it is isolating, and you fear being judged. I go back to the beginning and say, why did I have my kids so late? My eggs were too old. You're reaching.
That's all of us. That's the Bay Area.
But I find that I'm just now, over 3 years in, getting to the point where I'm giving up on the guilt. Yeah. I'm giving up on it. It has not served me well. And I would encourage people to not self-isolate. I think that I had the opportunity to involve family, friends at a level but I just wasn't good at asking for help. And I didn't know how to get through the grind of it and still also think about therapy and I should be jogging and
no, it all goes out the window.
It goes out the
window.
You're in the thick of it. And so now it's a phase of just recollecting myself so that I don't get the flu again and end up in the hospital for 5 days. That it is important that I actually take care of myself and that I fly somebody out from the East Coast and say, come on, Grandma, you gotta come out. Before I be like, no, don't. It's really important to don't sink. Just grab on to people before you go under and just hold on, because it doesn't serve you well to not get help.
Good. All right. Well, thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing this.
You guys
So
here.
yes.
And I hope that everyone listening found value in our talk, and I hope to be able to support everyone as we go on. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're so grateful.
We're so grateful for you.
Yes, we are.
You're in the foxhole with us.
See you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.